Awesome. At the end of your first year, they automatically double all the cash back you've earned. That's right, everything you earned doubled. The cash back from trips, restaurants, all doubled. Seriously, though, see terms and check it out for yourself at discover.com/match.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Dodgers are back in action tonight after an off day on Monday. They start a 3-game series at home against Oakland. Clippers backup forward Amir Coffey was arrested early Monday morning in Hollywood on suspicion of carrying a concealed weapon. Coffey was one of 2 passengers in a car. The driver was pulled over by LAPD for speeding. Coffey was booked for a misdemeanor and released. His court date is August 24th. Doc Rivers and Doris Burke are the new analysts for ESPN's #1 NBA broadcast team. Contracts for Mark Jackson and Jeff Van Gundy were not renewed. Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin went through his first practice in full pads on Monday. 7 months ago, on January 2nd, he was fighting for his life after suffering a cardiac arrest in that Monday night game in Cincinnati. What a wonderful story. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580 is dedicated to empowering our communities by providing progressive talk radio for our audience. We strive to be an intersectional voice for the voiceless. As a Black-owned and operated station, we are committed to highlighting diverse perspectives and creating safe spaces for meaningful dialogue. We believe that everyone has something unique to bring to these political, economic, social, and cultural conversations, and we don't shy away from the hard conversations about current events. We endeavor to be a beacon of hope and understanding, while boldly challenging listeners to think more deeply about difficult topics that impact us all. With this in mind, our mission statement at KBLA Talk 1580 is simple: to create an inclusive platform that promotes civil discourse through honest dialogue and encourages personal growth among our listeners, so they can become the active agents of change. Our vision is to establish ourselves as the premier radio network with relevant programming across the beloved community, connecting people through shared experiences and collective power for lasting impact beyond these challenging times.
Live from historic Leimert Park in Los Angeles, California, I'm Tavis Smiley, and I'm so glad to see you and me back in stride again. Before we get started with today's show, let me invite you to follow me on Facebook and Instagram at The Real Tavis Smiley, and get updates on X, formerly Twitter, at Tavis Smiley. By the way, should you miss any part of today's program or want to catch up on previous shows, you can always visit thetavisSmileyShow.com. That's thetavisSmileyShow.com, or wherever you get your podcast, and listen to the Tavis Smiley Show podcast at your leisure. Another great show on tap for you today. In our second hour, conversation with one of the 21 most influential black folk in technology, according to USA Today, Stacey Spikes, about what happens when power, technology, and race intersect in the entertainment industry. We'll talk with Spikes about facing adversity, defying stereotypes, and shattering glass ceilings. Should be a great conversation once we get to hour 2. In our third hour today, 2 conversations. On the top side of hour 3, a chat with the Tony and Peabody Award-winning co-founder of Def Poetry Jam, that is, and the founder of The Genius is Common movement, Bruce George. On the B side of hour 3, a conversation with the poet laureate of San Francisco, Tongo Ison Martin, about the emboldened neo-Confederate wave of violence in this country and honoring the legacy of the renowned poet Diane DePrima. But we commenced today's show in dialogue with the president of Alliance for Justice, Rakim Brooks, about whether the state of our freedom is once again tied to our courts, and if so, what that means in this present moment of consequential decisions by a rabidly conservative Supreme Court. I am pleased to welcome Rakim Brooks to this program. Rakim, how are you today, sir?
I'm doing just fine, Tavis. Thanks for having me.
It's good to have you on the program. Let me start with a broad question. We can narrow our way as we move through this hour. I'm glad we have the hour. A lot to talk about in this regard. But situate for me historically. I'm talking now about black folk in the courts, and we know that there was a time. He laughs. He laughs already. I ain't got my question on. He's already laughing.
Right.
There was a time historically when we were at a place where we felt there was no place else to go for reprieve but to our U.S. court system. That's part of our history, obviously. And I'm wondering if I can commence our conversation with you situating for us this present moment vis-a-vis black folk and the courts.
Sure. Well, the reason I laughed is it was good of you to say that there was a time where we thought our only reprieve was in the courts because, of course, our forebearers going back to Dred Scott did not feel that way. In fact, in the 19th century, the courts were really the enemy of civil rights. They were firmly in the hold of either the Confederacy or then the former Confederacy and soon to be Jim Crow South. But as you say, in the 1950s, we found ourselves with the Warren Court and Brown versus Board of Education, and eventually Loving versus Virginia, and any number of other cases that affirm the rights of black people to be free in this country and stand equally with every other citizen. In the past 70 years, we basically have taken slow but steady steps backwards from the promise of that generation. So that the current court, the Roberts Court, is probably the most conservative court in at least a century. I hesitate to say the most conservative court of all time because I'm going to leave that to the Dred Scott Court. But with regard to black folks, John Roberts, what most people don't know is that this is a crusade that he has been on since the 1980s when he was in the Reagan and Bush Justice Department. He has never felt that what he calls racial preferences, racial set-asides, et cetera, were constitutional. And in fact, his mentor, Chief Justice William Rehnquist, for whom he clerked, actually was one of the only clerks to suggest to his justice that Brown versus Board of Education or that Plessy v. Ferguson not be overturned. I mean, this is how far back this goes. And so our present moment is really a perilous one, as you described at the outset, because we have real enemies of racial progress. I mean, they have their own view of racial progress, but certainly it's not one that you or I would share. We have real enemies situated on the highest court in the land.
Yeah. When you mentioned a moment ago, and you laughed when I was saying something, I laughed when you were saying something. I just didn't laugh out loud, but I was laughing here internally in the studio. Now I'm laughing out loud. Because I heard you say that you don't want to call this present court the most conservative court in American history. You'll leave that to the court that made the Dred Scott decision. I laughed in part because they on their way there. If they ain't there yet, they on their way to being the most conservative court in a long time. So how close are they is my question. How close are they to being as bad as the court that passed down the Dred Scott decision?
Oh, I don't think anybody can get anywhere near what Roger Taney did. I mean, he basically said that black folks had no constitutional protection, that they were not citizens. We were never considered to be citizens by the founders in any way. And historically, that just wasn't accurate. There were, of course, slave states, and there was, of course, a compromise to permit slavery to continue to exist. But there were free black people in the North, some of whom even voted to adopt the Constitution. And so that was just an outright lie. Now, the present court also engages in plenty of lying. It reconstructs the history of Brown versus Board of Education to somehow be about colorblindness and not fundamentally about integration. And so they're certainly doing their best to run up to that legacy, but they'll never arrive. It's just such an awful period in our history. But that shouldn't, the fact that they're not exactly the same should not somehow lead us to let our guard down, because what they really are doing is unwinding all the progress that was made legally over the last 70 years. And for those of us who benefited from affirmative action, which is basically every member of society in truth, but I'm just going to limit it to black folks at the moment. Those of us who benefited from affirmative action, whose parents benefited from affirmative action and so forth, where it gave us an opportunity to show our stuff, right, on the grand stage of some of the best universities, and then to achieve, we can expect ever greater hostility to our presence on university campuses because of this.
When we come forward, I promise I'll come to this issue of affirmative action and give you more time to sort of unpack that. I'm a huge fan of Alliance for Justice and therefore a fan of Rakim Brooks, and yet I want to challenge him when we come forward on his notion that this Supreme Court will never get there. That is to say, being as conservative as the court that handed down Dred Scott. I'm not so sure. We'll talk about it when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
Unapologetically progressive. Unapologetically black. You're tapped into Tavis Smiley.
I'm James Alexander, a proud member of AARP. 1967, I was 17. That spring, my friends, the Barcades, and I made Soulfinger. It was a hit. Number 3 on the charts. That summer, we became the Great Otis Redding's Band. First gig, the famed Apollo. That fall, we toured. That winter found me in a morgue identifying the bodies of my bandmates and Otis Redding. My music and their memories bring me joy. The Barcades, forever.
What would you call a joy that is as solemn as it is sweet and knows no bounds? A joy that's beautifully rooted in soul and resilience. This is Black joy, a joy that reflects pride and honor despite every challenge. AARP believes the power of Black joy is limitless, and we celebrate this joy supreme. Join us in celebrating Black joy at aarp.org/blackcommunity.
Can you believe it's already back to school season? To get you ready, Chase is hosting a family event at its Crenshaw Community Center branch on Wednesday, August 2nd from 4 to 8 p.m. Chase will be giving away backpacks full of school supplies and other goodies to the first 1,000 attendees. There will be activities for the whole family to enjoy. Chase community managers will host financial health workshops for parents and kids to learn about the importance of budgeting and smart spending when preparing for back to school. Plus, there will also be lawn games and crafts for all ages. Visit chase.com/student banking to learn about Chase's family banking solutions. We hope to see you at Chase's back to school event at its Crenshaw Community Center branch on Wednesday, August 2nd. JP Morgan Chase Bank NA, member FDIC. The California Crusader newspaper would like to thank all of our subscribers for their support throughout the years, proudly serving the South Los Angeles and South Bay areas for more than 40 years. The California Crusader is a multicultural, black-owned, adjudicated newspaper that focuses on providing newsworthy information to the people in our community. We're constantly looking for ways to assist businesses in our community to connect with our subscribers. We provide low-cost, effective ways to promote your business with our reasonable and affordable advertising rates. You can participate by suggesting, sharing, and submitting your stories on the California Crusader newspaper Community Share Facebook group page, or visit our website at cal-cruise-news.com. That's calcruisenews.com. Then click on the Submit Now button located on the top right corner of the homepage, or text CCN to 42828. Again, text CCN to 42828. The California Crusader newspaper, working together to build a better community for our future. Subscribe today.
Ready to re-examine your assumptions and expand your inventory of ideas? More of Tavis Smiley coming your way right now.
All right, Rakim Brooks of the Alliance for Justice, I'm delighted to have you on as our guest in this first hour of Tavis Smiley today. And we're talking about the ways in which our court system is not about the business these days, as if it has been any time recently, advancing the kind of agenda that is not antithetical to the best interest of our people, and more expressly, what we can do about it. We're talking about whether or not the fate of our freedom in the days to come is tied to our courts, and if so, what does that mean? So before that break, Rakim had made the point in answer to a question I posed about how conservative this court really is, and whether or not they are as bad as the Taney court that handed down the Dred Scott decision. He said moments ago, in case you've just tuned in, that he doesn't think this court is as bad, not the most conservative court in the history of this country, because he would leave that game to the court that handed down the Dred Scott decision. I want to push back on that. They may not they may not be there now, Rakim. I'd put it this way: they got chalk on their shoes, even if they ain't stepped across the line just yet. They're getting awfully close, and I raised that because, and I've said this before, some years ago, I was on some national program, and I made the point that if we ain't careful in this country, we may very well find ourselves pushing back on Supreme Court decisions and legislation that once again wants to characterize us as 3/5 of a person. And I meant that sincerely. I wasn't saying it jokingly. I wasn't trying to be hyperbolic. I wasn't being outrageous. I meant that because we're on a slippery slope. And I don't think we can ever assume that the slippery slope we're on won't slide us right into hell. You look at what Ron DeSantis and others are doing on banning books. I mean, you know history. You're a student of history. You know how this stuff begins. And every empire, my study of history suggests to me that every empire in the history of the world eventually has its comeuppance. Every empire in the history of the world eventually has its reckoning. And when you start to see these kinds of things happening, people banning books, and you've got a would-be dictator, essentially, who wants to be president once again, named Donald Trump, you see all this stuff happening. Supreme Court making more and more conservative decisions that are completely out of step and out of line with everyday people in this country. I'm not so sure it's a foregone conclusion that they will never get there, as outrageous as it seems. That's my case. Disabuse me of that notion.
Well, it's well informed, Tavis, so I don't want to disabuse you of it. I'll just challenge maybe some of the presumptions, which is just to say, if we get there, it won't be the court that does it, I guess is my point.
Fair enough.
It will be political society as a whole that's done it, that we've empowered the most radical elements of our society and given them control of the levers, and as a consequence, we'll all suffer. That's really the point that I'm making. This current court, you're not wrong, is definitely, it has chalk on its shoes. The case, one case this term, 303 Creative, which was about the right of queer people to receive services without discrimination, is eerily similar to the civil rights cases of the late 1800s. For folks who don't know, those cases basically, the court ruled that the 13th and 14th Amendments didn't empower Congress to outlaw racial discrimination by private individuals, only the state. And the court recently, in this 303 Creative case, basically said, well, private individuals can discriminate because they have First Amendment rights against LGBTQ folks. They have First Amendment rights that should be protected. And a lot of us said, well, what about the folks who don't want to serve black people? Isn't that the same case? How is that in any way different? And so I'm with you. Don't mishear me in thinking that this court is supremely radical, that it's definitely trying to take us to a place we don't want to go. But I think it's ultimately the other political branches, that being the Congress and the presidency, that are the biggest threats to our freedoms. This current court is just an enabler in many ways. Now, that's a terrible thing.
Yeah.
We should, again, I don't want to minimize it. But for instance, there was a case this term where they basically could have empowered all of these rabid state legislatures that are gerrymandered and controlled by Republicans, and they chose not to do that for now. Now, there may come a day where they change their minds, and that's sort of what you're warning us about. So I always think it's worth having the warning, right? I disagree today, but have me back on the show, and I'll be like, Tavis, you were right. 2 years later, I was too optimistic about what these people would or wouldn't do.
No, I hope to never have you on to have that conversation, because frankly, if it gets that bad, I won't have a radio show to have you back on. They will shut down all Negroes on media. That's the first thing they do, right? They take the microphones away from us, so that ain't gonna happen.
Don't worry, learn Spanish. We'll broadcast from abroad.
There you go. That said, take me back 70 years ago. You made the point that we can sort of earmark this U-turn, as it were, following the Warren Court 70 years ago, that now finds us where we are. So take me back, 7 decades ago, and tell me what was happening and how you think we got to where we are now.
Okay, I'm going to try to be brief. I know we have an hour, but people don't want to listen to me for that long. So, okay, what happened? So I'm going to go back to President Eisenhower. He intentionally appoints Earl Warren Chief Justice after some back and forth. But there's a story that most folks don't know, which is the first time Brown versus Board of Education was heard, the vote was actually to affirm Plessy v. Ferguson.
That's right.
The court decides that they're going to have rehearing over the summer. They decide they're going to have rehearing in the fall. And over that summer, Chief Justice Vinson died. And Felix Frankfurter, they say, remarked, and then I knew there was a God, because Earl Warren is appointed and he brings the court together to a 9-0 decision to reverse Plessy v. Ferguson. And then they were off to the races. I mean, the Warren Court was the most progressive court in American history, and it provided us with things like Miranda, like right to counsel, so forth and so on. Loving v. Virginia, as I mentioned, interracial marriage. It goes on and on and on. And so Earl Warren decides he's going to retire, and actually we end up with a period in our history that's really, really quite similar to what happened in 2016. The court is actually in the balance, but nobody really recognizes it. They know that Earl Warren's going to step down. There's a good progressive candidate who's coming up, and then there's sort of this ultra-regressive right-wing candidate. Everybody does not think Richard Nixon could possibly win, just like people did not think Donald Trump could possibly win, and they do. And as a result, Richard Nixon appoints 4 people to the court. Donald Trump appointed 3, and history is forever changed. Starting across the 1970s and 1980s, you gradually see the court turning its back on criminal defendants. By the time you get to the 1980s, the Reagan administration has made a firm commitment to select judges that they believe will overturn Roe versus Wade. We obviously all know that happened last year. So we're seeing the culmination of a decades-long project to reverse all that progress that was made during the Warren Court. And the stage that we're in now, which is perhaps the scariest stage from my perspective, is they're starting to run out of agenda items, Tavis. They came together to overturn Roe. They've done that. They came together to overturn affirmative action. They've done that. And so then you just start to wonder, well, what positive agenda do they have? Positive not meaning affirmative. I just mean that they've got things that they want to do that aren't just about turning back what the Warren Court did. So we may be entering what is the conservative version of the Warren Court, a court that they believe, reinstills the founders' vision of society, which, as I like to remind people, nobody wants to live in the 1790s. Not a single person living today thinks that it would be great to go back to that period of time. I should say there's always some nut, but you get my point. There's nothing about that period that we wouldn't say, let's just take what was good about it and keep moving forward. But these folks seem not to recognize the simple logic in that.
Yep. See, and that's my pushback. I think you're wrong about that, respectfully. I think there are folk in this country who would not have a problem going that far back. That's the whole Donald Trump motif. We're going to make America great again. I mean, when was America ever great in the first place, right? But clearly it's a return to something in yesteryear. And I don't think that we can dismiss those persons who want to take us back to that point, number one. I'm building on my argument, Rakim. So here I come, brother. Here I come. I'm building on the argument I made earlier. Number one, respectfully, I think that's a generous and charitable read on your part, a kind read, that there's nobody in this country who wants to go back to that. I don't believe it, number one. Number two, I hear your point that they're running out of agenda items. Again, I submit the second argument in my build on. My second argument is simply this. When they run out of agenda items, they start picking stuff. And who better to pick on than black folk? I mean, you see that. Put another way, I say all the time to this audience, and you know this better than I do, Rakim Brooks, given what you do at Alliance for Justice, that the Supreme Court takes on the cases it wants to hear. That point is always worth underlining. They choose the cases they want to hear. And so there are all kinds of cases that they can choose from when they run out of agenda items. They've done away with Roe v. Wade. They've done away with affirmative action. You ran the list beautifully a moment ago. So then they start looking for stuff. They start looking for stuff they can choose to advance the kind of agenda they want to advance. And I believe that agenda ultimately, as I said earlier, is an agenda that will be antithetical to the best interest of our people, which takes us straight to your notion. And the piece that I saw you write not long ago that got my attention, that the fate of our freedom is in fact tied to them. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that does all make sense. And you listen. My middle name is, or my first name Rakim actually means the merciful. So you should always expect that I tend to have a view that we could do better. We ought not go down that path. Of course, you're completely right that there are elements in our society who, out of their ignorance, I guess I would say, would thrust us back to the 1800s. They just don't realize how bad things were for everybody.
Exactly.
In fact, and so I give them the benefit of the doubt only in the sense that I think if they knew better, they would do better, as we like to say. But that's likely not true in every person's case.
Yeah.
The reason though we wrote that piece saying that our fate is tied to the present court is for exactly the reasons that you're describing. I mean, I'll tell you, before I took this job, I was at the ACLU working on a project called Systemic Equality, and I grew up in public housing. My ethos is really about economic justice, as I know yours is and a lot of other folks. And what I determined was no matter how much we attempted to do on the economic justice front, if the court just, from a legislative perspective, if the court just came back and said Congress doesn't have the authority to do that, they were striking it down, as they almost did in the Affordable Care Act case, then what would we be left with? I mean, all of us who fought for the Affordable Care Act so that it would have the Medicaid expansion, and as you say, cover our people, and then lost that, right? We say that we won the case, but actually, if you look at the aftermath of that, Black people were probably the most hurt by the fact that the Medicaid expansion did not go into effect. And so I thought you got to work on the courts, right? There is no way of succeeding in creating the kind of society that we would like to see leave to our children and our children's children without addressing the court. And what I found was people just really were not alert to what the court was doing in their lives. They're more alert now because, in the aftermath of the Merrick Garland piece, in the aftermath of Roe, now in the aftermath of affirmative action, and folks like you really raising the issue, people are becoming aware that there are these unelected people who seem to constantly interfere in our democratic politics in a way that's radical and unhinged and doesn't seem at all consistent with anything that any of us understand about the Constitution. And so that's really the point that I'm trying to make. You're exactly right that they could thrust us back to something that we don't want to be. I'm actually saying they're in the way of something that we want to be.
I take that point, and I receive that. When we come forward, I want to talk about this issue you raised earlier of the Supreme Court now being an enabler. I love that word, and I like the frame that you create with that word enabler. In the minute and a half I have left, let me offer one more point as I keep building my argument here, Rakim Brooks, and respond on this in 90 seconds. I read an article not long ago, we had a conversation about it on this program, that there are more and more courts now reaching back to slavery-era laws that are still on the books to advance very unpopular decisions even in real time. Again, they're going back to slavery-era laws to render certain decisions right now. That ain't cute. That ain't cute, Rakim.
Right. Well, look, there's a whole show to be hosted on that, and something that our organization is actually trying to work on. I think these folks, this is again me being charitable. Let me actually be less charitable. They are just disrespectful. They actually think that it's they're just applying the law, right? Somebody said something in the 1830s. I'll give a quick quote from Shelby County. So folks know that was the case that basically struck down part of the Voting Rights Act. They went to the Chief Justice quotes this concept of equal sovereignty. If you look at the history of American law, you're like, where did that come from? And you find that it came from a man who was a Confederate soldier, one of the founders of the Ku Klux Klan, and eventually became the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, who was interested in equal sovereignty. Why? Because the southern states had been disempowered.
Hold that thought, Rakim Brooks. When we come forward, we'll come to this notion straight away of equal sovereignty and unpack that for you. This is getting good, as we say around here. Rakim Brooks is president of the Alliance for Justice. More with him when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
This is getting good.
Yeah, man.
Tavis Smiley continues when we come forward.
What does access mean?
Access means owning a home.
Access means growing my business.
Access means building generational wealth.
No matter your goals, U.S. Bank Access Commitment Programs and initiatives provide the tools and resources to help you reach them. Access your financial goals at usbank.com/access. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
Hey, life life doesn't stop when cancer starts. After diagnosis, treatment is vital. But for some, just getting there, to appointments, chemo, or radiation, is a major challenge. You can change that. Volunteer to give rides with the American Cancer Society Road to Recovery program. Driving for a few hours of your day can make a life-saving difference for someone with cancer. Visit cancer.org/drive to learn more.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network. Asylum seekers continue to sleep on sidewalks outside a Midtown Manhattan hotel, with New York City struggling to find shelter for them. They were once again outside the Roosevelt Hotel overnight, which is the intake center for newly arriving migrants. Yesterday, African-American Mayor Eric Adams said his administration is trying to figure out a solution, while once again calling on the federal government for more help. Neighborhoods all across America will celebrate National Night Out this evening. The annual event, now in its 40th year, looks to broaden the relationship between local police and the communities they serve. Many events set to take place will feature games, music, and food. You can find more information online at natw.org. And that's the latest. I'm Mike Moore from your 24/7 news source, the Black Information Network, and BINnews.com.
We have a tough drive through Monterey Park. This is affecting our travels on the 10 West 10. Just past New Avenue is where we have a crash that's taken up 3 of the center traffic lanes. West 10 at New Avenue. They've issued a SIG alert. That's an unplanned lane closure, ramp closure of 30 minutes or longer. Multiple vehicle crash, possibly 5 vehicles involved. We're stop and go from Peck. Diamond Bar on that 60 eastbound at Lemon Brea. Earlier wreck still affecting 2 of the left lanes here. And the slow and go drive from Lee's Fullerton Road. Still seeing that tough drive for the Sepulveda Pass 405 South. Approaching Burbank Boulevard, the slow speeds all the way up and over the hill to Getty.
Discover credit cards do something pretty awesome. At the end of your first year, they automatically double all the cash back you've earned. That's right, everything you earned doubled. The cash back from trips, restaurants, all doubled. Seriously, though, see terms and check it out for yourself at discover.com/match.
This is the KBLA Sports Minute with Ray Richardson.
The Dodgers are back in action tonight after an off day on Monday. They start a 3-game series at home against Oakland. Clippers backup forward Amir Coffey was arrested early Monday morning in Hollywood on suspicion of carrying a concealed weapon. Coffey was one of 2 passengers in a car. The driver was pulled over by LAPD for speeding. Coffey was booked for a misdemeanor and released. His court date is August 24th. Doc Rivers and Doris Burke are the new analysts for ESPN's #1 NBA broadcast team. Contracts for Mark Jackson and Jeff Van Gundy were not renewed. Buffalo Bills safety Damar Hamlin went through his first practice in full pads on Monday. 7 months ago, on January 2nd, he was fighting for his life after suffering a cardiac arrest in that Monday night game in Cincinnati. What a wonderful story. No debates, no speculation, just the info you need. That's your KBLA Sports Minute. I'm Ray Richardson. More news, opinions, and conversation when we come forward on KBLA Talk 1580.
We've got a lot to talk about.
Are you interested in catching up on all the latest entertainment news, trending topics, and exciting interviews? I got you. Tune in to The Raw Report with Robin Ayers, Monday through Friday, 6 to 7 p.m. I'm your host, Robin Ayers. Join me every weekday with some of the best entertainment contributors in the business as we break down what's going on, who's got next, and what not to miss. Only on The Raw Report with Robin Ayers.
Unapologetically progressive. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got your black. Thanks for supporting us in year 2. If you promise to keep listening, we promise to keep bringing it on KBLA Talk 1580.
Staples has great prices on everything you need for back to school. Right now, 2 pocket poly folders and an 8-pack of Staples No. 2 pencils are just 50 cents. Offer ends August 26. Pricing and limits may vary in-store and online. School on, save on at Staples.
Dominique DePrima here. Listen, engaging kids in conversations about finances can be a great way to teach them about money management and financial independence. You don't need to review accounts in detail, but simply having an intentional conversation can really go a long way, like talking Talk to them about goals using conversation starters like how to make decisions about saving and spending money, recycling black dollars. These conversations can help build a long-lasting foundation for a strong financial future. Whatever your financial goals, U.S. Bank Access Commitment Initiatives can help support you in reaching them. Access your financial goals at usbank.com/access. Member FDIC, Equal Housing Lender.
At Charmin, we heard you shouldn't talk about going to the bathroom in public, so we decided to sing about it.
Roll Charmin ultra strong when you drop in the beat. It cleans with way less effort on your seat. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Yeah, roll it, drop it. Charmin flows extra strong from the road. Your butt hella clean while you're sitting on the bowl. Yeah, it's all you need for that bathroom groove. Get you in and out without nothing to prove.
Charmin Ultra Strong cleans better so you can use less. Enjoy the go with Charmin.
Who do you trust to get at the truth?
Tavis, Smiley.
That's who. The conversation continues right now.
It does indeed. Our guest in this hour is Rakim Brooks. He's the president of Alliance for Justice, and this is a rich conversation about whether or not in this present moment, in late modernity, our freedom, the fate of our freedom is tied to the courts. Rakim suggests that it is. I wouldn't argue that. And for me, at least, that's a scary proposition. I think it is for Rakim as well on some level. But I'm more scared than he is in this regard. And we're unpacking our why we are so frightened, as it were, in this particular hour about the court and the direction that they're taking this country in. My thesis, in case you've just tuned in, is that we could end up with a court that is as bad as the court, the Taney court that gave us the Dred Scott decision. Rakim doesn't think it's going to get that bad, but I think one thing we both agree on is that given the moment that we're in, it's going to get worse before it gets better, if it gets better. It's going to get worse before it gets better, if it gets better. On that point, Rakim, can I get an amen?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Amen on that
okay.
one.
We agree on that one. All right. Before the break, you were breaking down this notion of equal sovereignty for a particular reason. Let me ask you to back that thing up, break it down again, and tell me why you were referencing it.
Yeah, I will. So, Tavis, you had made the point that the courts are often relying on precedents from either the antebellum era, so the slavery era, or the Jim Crow era. And I was saying, you're exactly right, and it's a disturbing trend in our law and something that judges really need to think long and hard about. And the reason is simple. It just signals a fundamental disrespect for black people in this country, just as Confederate monuments did. And the example that I was giving was in the Shelby County case where John Roberts wrote a decision for the court saying that Section 4, which is the pre-clearance requirement of the Voting Rights Act, and just to break that down, a bunch of states had to go to DOJ and say, hey, we're going to do these things to our voting laws before they did them. So John Roberts struck that down. The reason he did so, okay, let's just say you disagreed with it for any number of reasons. Okay, I'm willing to play that legal game. But he decided to quote this concept of equal sovereignty. And the origin of that concept, this is what I was explaining, actually came from a Chief Justice in the early 1900s who we know had been a Confederate soldier, had been a member of one of the founding members of the Klan in Louisiana, and had praised D.W. Griffith's Birth of a Nation. Now, of all people to quote, why him? Mm-hmm. Why that case? And so when folks like you are rightly skeptical and cynical about what this court can be, I'm just giving you more evidence in the direction. Like you're doing this intentionally. You're a smart man. You know exactly what it is. And it sort of signals the kind of hubris that some folks have where they just think, I'm just going to sit and do whatever I want. Doesn't matter what you feel. Yeah. But ultimately, these are positions of public trust. They reflect our public law and our commitments to the Constitution, especially the equality of persons. And so to choose cases and case law that reflects the ugliest moments of our history and treat them as neutral principles is always something that I find not just disrespectful, but really disgusting.
Let me pick up on that point. Clearly, they continue to make decisions, this court does, that disrespect black life and black people. Clearly, one cannot point to anything that they've done of late that suggests that black lives matter. But let me take it a step further. I'm not sure that one could make the case that they've done anything of late that suggested that anybody's life matters. And you take my point that these decisions have been so vicious across the board. Whether you're talking about Native American life, whether you're talking about Black life, the lives of women, the lives of babies. I mean, I mean, all kinds of issues one could raise with regard to the decisions that came out of this last term of the U.S. Supreme Court. I raised that to ask, it's as if they are acting and moving in a way with a malign neglect for the concerns, the wishes, the views of everyday people. Now, I'm not necessarily, underline the word necessarily, I'm not necessarily suggesting that their decisions have to be in line with the majority of the demos, but they've gone completely in the opposite direction, Rakim.
Yeah. Well, I think that's mostly right. I'm going to point out some small caveats just because I can't let you leave people thinking that nothing is improved. So, I mean, Justice Gorsuch, like the justice for whom he clerked, Justice Kennedy, has proven to be an outlier in some respects. So he ruled in a case called the Bastion case that basically transgender people were protected by our civil rights laws. He similarly has proven to be the most active advocate for Native American rights in American history. All in the insular cases, racist, and Justice Sotomayor jumped right on that. That was basically a case that said that the Constitution didn't follow the flag and was about American imperialism. He was like, that's got to be overturned. He pointed to all of the treaties that the United States has broken with the Native Americans and really pushed for them to be reinforced. And so there are opportunities and gaps in places where the conservative justices disagree with one another. But as you say, on issues of race in particular, and on the issue of the ability to regulate one's own body in the Dobbs case, they walked in lockstep in the wrong direction.
Yeah. I'd only say, my only retort, I'm running out of.
You got one. Go
yeah,
ahead.
you know I got one. I'm running out of arguments, but I got one. My only retort to your Gorsuch point is simply this: that a broken clock is right twice a day, Rakim Brooks. That's all I'll say about that. That even Gorsuch can be right a couple times a day, but I digress on that point. Let me ask you this question. I've had some phenomenal conversations with my friend Elie Mystal, brilliant justice correspondent for The Nation magazine, brilliant author. Love Elie Mystal. We've had some great conversations about this because he, as you know, has written a book about this, and that is the ways in which the court needs to be fixed, the ways in which we need to adjust the nature of the court, the size of it, the term limits, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. There are a number of things he's laid out in his book about how we ought to fix the courts. Let me ask a question of you that I haven't even asked of Elie Mystal. What's in it specifically for Black people when it comes to the conversation about how, if in fact we are ever going to fix the courts? And I believe that the chorus of voices is growing in Washington, that the court does need to be fixed in some ways. So what's specifically in it for Black folk in this conversation about how we're going to fix the courts?
Yeah. Well, I always say to people, I want you to imagine the fundamental rights that you think you do have or should have. I clerked on the Constitutional Court of South Africa, which was an amazing moment for me in my life because I went to a country that had a history as terrible as ours in many ways with regard to race, given apartheid, and that chose basically to scrap its constitution and to start all over again and say, what are the rights that we want for folks? We in America are not inclined to do that. We like to sort of gradually reinterpret our Constitution over time, adding amendments and so forth. But if you stopped for a second and said, if this Constitution could do things for me like genuinely protect me from police violence, genuinely entitle me to housing or at least to be free from housing discrimination, genuinely provide me with equal opportunity to not just college but a profession that I found not just remunerative but soul-fulfilling, so forth and so on. You just walk down your list. You would find that all that, like in most societies, runs through the fundamental law, the Constitution in one way or another, and that the people who interpret that Constitution have the ability to recognize your rights or not recognize them, to see them fulfilled or to see them unfulfilled. And so the reason this is such a crucial conversation for Black folks is because I was telling a friend the other day, the only thing I know about Black people is that we've been seeking peace for over 400 years. That's what we are after, right? We want peace of mind, peace of soul. And I'm just saying we'll never have that unless we have a court that reflects what we know to be the best of humanity.
Yeah. I'm just a black man like Rakim Brooks seeking peace. That's all a brother wants. All a brother wants is peace. When we come forward, I want to ask Rakim again this question about the Supreme Court now being an enabler. This point he made earlier in our dialogue. We'll talk about the politics of the court, and his sharing with us his work in South Africa raises a question for me as well that I want to probe. More with Rakim Brooks when we come forward on Tavis Smiley.
More of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
I'm Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. I learned about atrial fibrillation the hard way. My symptoms would come and go: shortness of breath, fatigue. I kept going. Then I got so lightheaded, I couldn't. My doctor said I have AFib, so I'm about 5 times more likely to have a stroke. Other symptoms: irregular heartbeat, heart racing, chest pain can come and go, but the risk of stroke stays. If you have symptoms, tell a doctor. Visit notimetowait.com.
Sponsored by Bristol-Myers Squibb and Pfizer.
Parents, we know we can't protect our kids from everything. Eventually, they're going to bump their heads or scrape their knees. But we can protect them from 6 types of cancer. HPV, or human papillomavirus, is a common preventable virus that can cause cancer later in life. The HPV vaccine prevents human papillomavirus and all the cancers it can cause. The American Cancer Society recommends getting your sons and daughters the HPV vaccine starting at age 9 to protect them later in life.
Carson, you back! Hey, I am Jasmine Carson, LSU Women's Basketball National Champion. I had to up my game, and this time I upped my intimate grooming routine too. Venus for Pubic Hair and Skin is the only razor and regimen specifically designed for your pubic area. Featuring a razor with a patented irritation defense bar and a skincare regimen that is dermatologist tested, Venus helps protect your pubic skin from shave irritation. Visit GilletteVenus.com to learn more about the full regimen of products.
Sure you know what's up. Hey, I am D.L. Hughley, host of the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show, heard weekdays from 2 to 4 exclusively on KBLA Talk 1580. I promise to make you think a little, but laugh a whole lot more. So tune in to the D.L. Hughley Afternoon Show 2 to 4 only on KBLA Talk 1580.
For all of us, this generation and the next, there is simply no place in our lives for litter. And yet, it's everywhere we look. And unfortunately, it does belong to all of us. So, let's come together and create a litter-free, clean California, once and for all. Remember to properly dispose of your trash and recycling. Secure truckloads with tarps to keep debris from flying out. Clean out your car when you're at a gas station. Take pride in your community by organizing a cleanup event. Or join a cleanup event near you. Zero litter is the goal. Join us at cleanca.com. That's cleanca.com. Let's do it together. Brought to you by Caltrans. cleanca.com.
Smart talk for curious people just like you. You're listening to Tavis Smiley.
Rakim Brooks, you made a powerful point earlier that I've been noodling on since you made it. You're right about the fact that South Africa decided to just rip their constitution up and start all over again. I would that we would do that in this country, but you're also right about the point that because of, how might I put it, or were it not for interposition and nullification and amendment, we would, and protest, we would not be where we are vis-a-vis our own constitution. And I think you sort of answered this in the way you teed that thing up. But if, just imagine with me for a moment, if in fact we could tear this thing up called the U.S. Constitution and do it all over again, put you on the spot here, what 3 things would you start with when it comes to black folk in particular? What would you start with if we were going to tear this thing up and do it all over again in this country?
Ooh, that's a heavy question. I'd suggest everybody read Ellie's book.
Yeah. While you're thinking, I'll tell you what my first one is. To give you, that's an unfair question to put you on the spot about. But who said I was fair? That said, I would start with what's been missing in the Constitution from day one: education. I believe that there ought to be an amendment in our Constitution that guarantees every child in this country access to, and here's the language, an equal, high-quality education. We cannot prejudge outcomes, but every child in this country ought to be guaranteed, at least at the starting line, access to an equal high-quality education. That's missing for black folk in this Constitution. So there's one. What two things might you add, or might you start with?
Yeah. Well, let me add on to that one, complicate it just a little bit.
Okay.
You know, the reason I always pause is because there are plenty of state constitutions that have a right to education. And what we find is that the education systems are underfunded. I'm thinking about Michigan in particular because there was a case literally challenging the underfunding of Detroit schools. The reason, as I said earlier, I came to this work is because of a case called San Antonio School District versus Rodriguez. It's both about education, but it's actually about poverty. So I'd start there. Mm-hmm. Just like race is a suspect classification, you can't discriminate against people on the basis of their race or on their gender and sexuality. I would make poverty a suspect classification.
Yes,
and in some ways, in South Africa, it is. If you look at it and someone is poor, it's not a reason both to discriminate against them, deny them certain things. But in addition, it raises for our society the question of why are people poor? Mm-hmm. What's happening here that's promoting this? And, you know, conservatives will say it's something about that individual's lack of initiative and so forth. But I think you would get it a lot if you made that suspect classification. I would keep the First Amendment. You need protest rights in society to resist government, everything else that's in the First Amendment, you know, right to freedom of religion, freedom of conscience, and so forth. All those pieces are important. I think the last piece remains it's not just a right to vote, but it's somehow something about both a right to vote and a right to have your vote matter. And thinking through how you would construct that, because it's not, you know, plenty of us are casting ballots all over the place and not seeing things improve. And I know in our community that's a particular frustration. And it's because it's not just the right to vote that matters, it's how that vote fits in within the broader political system. You know, actually, as I say this, there's a guarantee to a Republican form of government in our Constitution, and the Supreme Court has just read that out completely. And so maybe that's what some folks were after, particularly our forebearers in the Reconstruction era, was really thinking about what does it mean to have a government that supports, protects, and enables its citizens and is in proper relation to them.
I'm glad you had that word protects. I was about to say that. It matters, but it ought to be protected. And that's the key word for me. And so I'm glad you had that. When we come forward in our remaining moments with Rakim Brooks, because I feel like messing with him, I'll give him at least a couple minutes to think about it. I wonder what he would do with the Second Amendment, the thing we keep on fighting about, that the NRA keeps advancing. What would he do about that? How to ensure that into the future, if we were going to start all over again, we wouldn't be debating the Second Amendment. Then we'll close, of course, by talking about how he sees the Supreme Court enabling the work of certain politicos in this country. Rakim Brooks right now on Tavis Smiley.
You're listening to Tavis Smiley. Tavis Smiley. Ranked number 45 on the Heavy 100 list of the 100 most important radio talk show hosts in America.
MC Light, or AARP, hip-hop, the cultural phenomenon that took New York by storm in 1973, is celebrating 50 years of rocking mics and crowds. Whether you're a ride-or-die hip-hop head or simply curious about its origins, check out the latest issue of AARP the magazine. It celebrates this incredible milestone with a featured story brimming with fun hip-hop facts and history. Head over to aarp.org/black community to learn more.
Community is more than where you live. It's the people in it who go above and beyond to help it thrive. During the 50th anniversary of hip-hop and the 75th anniversary of Black radio, AARP recognizes the members, volunteers, people, and partners giving back to our communities. We believe when our efforts drive change for the greater good, we all thrive together. To learn more about how AARP supports efforts to keep our communities thriving, visit aarp.org/black community.
We boldly go where no man has gone before.
Boldly taking talk radio where it has never gone before. New vistas, new voices, new views, new visions, new victories. We're KBLA Talk 1580, and we're taking public media black. KBLA Talk 1580. We've got a lot to talk about.
KBLA Talk 1580 joins you in standing for education as a right, not a privilege. Charles R. Drew University of Medicine and Science is a private, nonprofit, community-founded, student-centered university committed to cultivating diverse health profession leaders who are dedicated to social justice and health equity for underserved populations. CDU does this through outstanding education, clinical service, and community engagement. Recently, Charles Drew University made history by opening only the 5th medical school at an historically black university. Congratulations, South LA, and congratulations to the dean of the medical school, Dr. Deborah Protho-Stith. CDU is now training doctors and providing $90 million in annual economic benefit to Watts and surrounding neighborhoods. To apply for medical school, get more information, or sign your child up for the Junior Doctors Saturday School program, visit cdrewu.edu. That's cdrewu.edu. At KBLA, we are dedicated to equity in education and ending healthcare apartheid, and we don't black down. This is a community call to action from KBLA Talk 1580.
KBLA Talk 1580. I'm Dominique DePrima from the show First Things First, weekday mornings from 6 to 9. Join us tomorrow with the historian who first brought Bruce's Beach to our attention, Allison Rose Jefferson, plus headlines, trending topics, and your phone calls. It's a Wealth Building Wednesday, only on KBLA Talk 1580.
Let's get back to more of Tavis Smiley right now.
3 minutes left. 2 questions, Rakim Brooks. I'll start with this. How would you, since we're going to tear this thing up and start all over again, at least in our minds, how would you fix this issue that we keep arguing about vis-a-vis the Second Amendment?
That one's actually simple. I want to give the founders some credit. You just read the prefatory clause. A well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state. The right of the people to keep and bear arms should not be infringed. Now, for folks who are listening, I'm going to just make that simple. When your mama, like my mama said, before you leave this house, comma, clean your room, right? Many of us decided we weren't going to clean our room. And therefore, what did that mean? You can't leave the house. The prefatory clause matters. The Supreme Court has become the only institution that deals with American English that has decided to read out prefatory clauses. The whole preamble, right? Everybody knows that part. We the people, right? Supreme Court says that has no application to the Constitution. But as I said, for those of us who remember, before you leave this house, comma, clean your room, you know the prefatory clause matters. We just need to read those phrases back in.
I take your point. Love that answer. I close with this. You mentioned earlier in this conversation, with 2 minutes to go, that this Supreme Court has become an enabler. I close by asking, who and what are they enabling, to your mind, Rakim Brooks?
Yeah, well, for the past 2 decades, they were really enabling the Republican Party. Of the current justices that sit there, 4 of them were active members in Bush v. Gore. That's just what folks need to know. So if you remember, George Bush narrowly wins. Some people stole the presidential election, and who helped them out? 4 of the justices were his lawyers. 1, Clarence Thomas, was sitting on the current court. Justice Alito was off on the Third Circuit. So you have to understand the deep connection between the present court and the Republican Party. But what's happened with Donald Trump, just as he's trying to wrest control of the Republican Party from the establishment, the justices are kind of caught in between. Yes, he appointed 3 justices of his own, but most of them are still true adherents to the old Republican Party. And so we're kind of seeing a civil war on their side, but they're nevertheless enabling a conservative agenda. And that's sort of the difference between where you and I are. I think they're enabling a very regressive conservative agenda, but not yet a Trumpian agenda. But that could change.
Fair enough. 30 seconds to go. Tell me, given the direction that we're headed, again, you and I may not agree on where this is going to take us or could take us, but we do agree that we're headed in the wrong direction. How then, in that regard, do you sustain your hope, given the work that you do at Alliance for Justice?
Oh, I love what Sherilyn Ifill says. There's no point in history where you say, and then black people gave up. So you just keep doing the work. You just keep moving forward, because if we look at our history, it is a history of progress, with setbacks to be sure, with enemies abounding, but ultimately one of progress and I think success and hope. And so I'm holding close to my forebears in that respect.
It's a great quote from Sherilyn Ifill, and a great place on which to end this conversation. There is no point in history where you read, and then black folk gave up, and you never will. Rakim Brooks is the president of the Alliance for Justice, who I've been honored to have on this program. Thanks for your insights, Rakim. We'll do it again, sir. All the best to you.
Thank you. Have a good one.
You too, my friend. Hour 2 of Tavis Smiley when we come forward.
KBLA 1580 Santa Monica.
I'm Mike Moore. Here's the latest from the Black Information Network, a silent